Okay, so hopefully you are able to hear me and see the screen. Can you hear me? Could somebody type? Okay. Okay, nice. So we are going to start in a couple of minutes. So let's do some announcements. So you already know homework 3 is assigned, and uh, we basically in here there's a problem, I think. Okay, but you have it on the Moodle.
Hocam yani aslında birkaç kez oldu ama tüm bu ödevler çok fazla veriliyor. Diğer dersler. Çünkü midterm'ler kalktı. Vermeniz de çok normal zaten verilmesinde bu dersler. Ama hepsi mesela hafta sonu geliyor hocam. Pazartesi de veriyor. Mesela şu an pazartesi de 4 tane veriyor ama cumartesi de midterm var. Hani acaba ertelenme ihtimali var mı? Diğer arkadaşlarla çekiyorum ama ben sadece sormak istedim. Hani böyle bir ihtimal olma. Bir gün belki yani bir gün olsa iyi çünkü biraz yoğun yani.
So for that, you should speak with Semraja because like she assigns the homeworks, and for us it is kind of similar. We understand you that the homeworks and projects are like gathering up, and like we try to do our best. But you can speak with Semraja, okay? For me as well, the due date is so close for homework 3, I think. Yani hocaya iletebilirsiniz onları. And for design stage 2, the feedback we are like we will try to finish the feedback in a couple of days. Some of you should already got the feedback on Moodle. And basically for the next stage, you will start implementing a database using Access. So for that, there should be at least one person in your group that can use Access. So if there are like problematic groups with nobody has to access, you can like send an email to us. We will try to arrange something in that case. But if it is not the case, if there is at least one person with access, you can like do a Zoom meeting and like some of you could work on the design part, and then you can like combine the separate parts in the access. With access, it is hard to collaborate, so you cannot like create one, let's say, table and combine it easily. So you need to like create one file, one database file, and you need to basically work on that. So it is enough for if one person can use access. And for the implementation stage 2, it is going to be related to this lab. In this lab, we will start doing stuff using the graphical user interfaces. Again, we have a handout file. This is from the older labs, so you can use it for reference. And we are also recording this lab in case you need to like refer to it. But like some of the explanations in the handouts could be like not in detail. And we are going to work on this example database file. If you have access, you can download the database file. Otherwise, you can just listen. And when you download a database from web, you need to first enable the content. Be careful about that. Like otherwise, the queries would not run. And this is the database that we used in multiple different labs. So it is with the students, users, teachers are giving classes, students are enrolled into classes, etc. We included some additional queries in here, and they are like very basic queries. For example, in the user table, we are using unique IDs. So to create a new user, we need a unique ID number. And to find the next available ID, what can we do? We can just find the maximum of this ID attribute, add one to it, and it is going to be our next available ID. This query is basically doing that. From the user table, get the maximum of the ID plus one, and call this attribute next ID. So the column is called next ID with just one value showing the next available ID. Under the design tab, if I run it, it will show me 16, which is the next user's ID. If I were to create a new user, the ID should be 16, for example. We have a list student query. It is doing basically a projection. And I think we use the design view to create this query. Therefore, when you go into the SQL view, it is showing us with inner joins. So in the class and also in the lab, when we write SQL directly, instead of using the joins, we just define the where conditions to make the joins. So they are like similar. But if you are using the QB in the project, you can use any of them. You can design your queries using QB, or you can just directly write your SQL queries. And in here, it is basically showing only the student users. So remember, we had a is-a relation between student and user. The parent was student and child was the student. So the parent is user. If we make a join based on the IDs, then we will be able to show the username and surname, which is included in the user table, as well as the student ID, which is what we need. So if we run this query, it is showing only the students. And we have another query to show the courses of a student. Again, similar, we make the join operations in the QB with a criteria on the student ID. And this s_id is given as a parameter. If I were to write an existing parameter name, a table name, etc., it will use that value. But if it is not an existing value, when I run it, it is going to ask me the value of it. So in that case, for example, if I say, okay, for student number 9, run this query, and it will show the courses of the student number 9. So today we are going to start implementing user interfaces, and they are used for giving a better experience to the user. So if some regular user is going to do stuff in your database, then you should supply the functionality in a more fancy or easy way. To do that, we are using a graphical user interface, and in Access, every window is called a form. Under the Create tab, we have an option to create a blank form. There are also some options to create using a wizard, but in this course, we are going to use the blank form only. So if I click on blank form, it is going to create me a new blank form. Similar to tables and queries, you need to save it first. Otherwise, we are going to put some elements in here. So in some elements, the user will be able to type some data. If it is not saved, then we cannot use that data. So like you should first save the forms as well when you create them. So let's say we are starting with a simple task of listing all the, or let's say, let's start with the basic elements. So I'm going to name this form as tests. So it is not focusing on on some task, but we will try to introduce some of the elements that we use in here. Similarly, we have multiple views of the form. In the layout view, we put the elements together. And in the form view, we are going to use the form. So when a user is, the regular user is using your application, the form view will be used. And when we are designing, when we are putting the elements together, we are going to use the layout view. Design view is also an option, but in the design view, the layout is not given. So you need to like adjust sizes of the multiple things, etc. The layout view is the option that we are going to use. And when we are in the layout view, under the design tab, we have some elements that we can put inside the form. So the most basic one is this third one called label. If you click on that and click on any empty place in our form, it is going to create a label. And labels are used for giving information to the user. So let's say welcome to our form, etc. To give information to the user, maybe you expect some input from the user, you can give information using the labels. And if you click any of the items and right click and click on properties, for each item you have multiple different properties. So this is a label. When the label is selected, this property sheet shows the specific options for a label. There are like lots of options. You can play with the style, color, etc. And we are going to only focus on a couple of them. So some of them are related with the style, you can like play with them, but some of them are important for us. The first one is the name of that item. So we are going to, not for labels, so for labels we are just giving static information to the user, but with some elements we need to see the data in those elements. And for that we are going to refer it by its name. If we do not know its name, then we cannot refer it. So we need to give meaningful names to elements. But for labels, since we don't need to get the data out of this label, we already know what's written in there, there is no problem. So what's written in a label is called a caption. So this is the welcome to our form part, what I have written inside. I can change it from here as well. It will update on the label, but its size is not big enough, so I can resize the elements. If I go into the corners, my mouse cursor will change in that case. I can also specify the width, height, etc. Using this property sheet. For example, the font size, etc. About the styling. And we also need to get some input from the user most of the time. And to do that, the simple one is a text box, this second item here. So if I click on it and click on any empty place in my form, now since I'm using the layout, I cannot just directly put it into a corner that I want. It is going to be in relation to the existing items. So I can put next to this label or under this label, etc. So I put the text box. The text box also comes with a label. So most of the time the user is going to write something into that text box, and to indicate what should be written, it produces the label as well. But be careful that these two are two different things. Sometimes people give a name to we need to give a name to the text boxes, right? But mistakenly, sometimes people give the name to the label. So these are two separate things. Be careful about that. So for the text box, the name is automatically generated now. It is the starting from index 0. This is the 0th item. It is a label. This is label 3. So it uses some naming convention, but it is not meaningful most of the time. So we need to put some meaningful name here. Let's call it let's call it input for now, or maybe input name to be more specific. This is the name of the item, not the label name. It is a different thing. The name of the item I changed. And if I go into the form view, then I will be able to type something into this text box. So remember, in the form view, we are using the form. To design it, I should be in the layout view. I'm going back into the layout view again. So this is still written, but if I save it, close it, and open the form again, it is gone. So all of the inputs, they are not saved. They are as long as that form is open, you can see the inputs. Now I would like to also add a button. So it is this fourth item here, and to submit some information, submit some input, we are using the buttons. And basically, using the buttons, the user will be able to run queries. So clicking on the button, I will click on any empty place, and the button wizard comes up. With the button wizard, you can give some functionality to the button, but we are most of the time going to design it ourselves, because these are like some simple tasks, but they are only singular tasks. So you can run just one query using the wizard. But we most of the time would like to check some of the, let's say, elements, run some multiple queries, etc. So therefore, instead of using the wizard, I'm going to cancel it. Sometimes people click on finish, be careful about it as well. So if you click on the finish, it is going to it is going to navigate to the next record. So I should cancel the button. So if I double click on the button, I can change the text that is written on this button. Let's say something, okay. To give a functionality to the button, we are going to use macros. So there is also an option to use Visual Basic, but we are going to use the macros since they are simpler and we can do the same task. I'm going to right click on the button and click on the build event. And then I have different like options. Since we are going to use the macros, I will choose macro builder and click on OK. And this is my macro view. With macros, you can think it like blocks of code. So basically we are writing code, but we are using some elements, some existing parts to do our code. So for example, most of the basic ones. So by the way, if you click on this combo box, it will display your options. You can like find the thing that you would like to do, or you can like start typing. It will like autocomplete it. Again, we are going to only use a small subset of these macros. The most simple one is a message box. So if I write message box, if I choose the message box from that part, it is going to bring me this message box element, let's say. I can like hide or unhide its information. It is used to show some information to the user in a message box, basically. And I can directly type this message. This is the message box, let's say, or this is the message actually. You can put a beep sound to it. Let's say no to the beep for now. You can give a type. This is like determining the symbols used in there, etc. And this is the title of this message box. And this is my macro page. I need to save it as well. So I'm going to save this macro page and close it. That is attached to my button. So if I would like to go back to the macro page, I should right click on the button and click on build event. Since I already initialized it with macros, it is going to show me the macro page of it. So let's try to use this button now. I should go into the form view, right clicking on the form name, going into form view. Now if I click on this button, it is going to show me the message box with the message written on it. So if you have any problems, questions, you can like interrupt me at any minute. So let's also try to use some user inputs inside the message box. So to do that, we should know the name of the element. So input name is my text box name. So the text box I created is called input name. I'm going back into the macro page of the button, and inside this message box, if I would like to use some existing data, I should start with an equals sign. This is specifically for this message box. This is how it is, how it functions. So if I need to include some parameters, some like element values, etc., I need to start with an equals sign and put the quotation marks to indicate that this is a string. So if I save it and close it, going into the form view, nothing has changed. Just the way I write it has changed. I'm going back into the layout view, going back into the build event. So I could append some parameters to this message box, and in this case I'm going to add the value of some element inside the form test. Since we are in the same page, I can directly refer to it with its name. So I'm going to check its name again. The text box is called input name. So I can write this sign, this and ampersand sign is used for concatenating the different strings. And if I start typing input, you will see that input name is also included in here. It is my text box. So since we are in the same form page, I can directly refer to that element. So I'm going to choose input name here, save it and close it. And going back into the form view, let's write something in the text box if I could do. Clicking on the OK button, I see that the value that's in the text box is concatenated with our message. Any problems, questions so far? So I'm just, maybe I should also make it larger on some other page. So I just wrote this one as my message. It starts with the equal sign to be able to use parameters in it. Since we are using parameters in it, to indicate a string, I need to use the double quotation marks. To concatenate, to append, to put strings together, I'm using this ampersand sign, the and sign, and the parameter name. Since we are in the same form page, I can just directly refer to it with its element name. So going back to here. Now let's say I would like to run some query and see the results of it using a button. So I'm going to go into the layout view. I should be under this design tab to see the elements. I'm going to add some other button. Let's put it somewhere here. And I'm going to cancel the wizard. Double click on the button in the layout view to change the text that is written in this button. So let's say run query. And if I go into the build event of it, choosing macro builder, I should also maybe note the things that we use here. So we already used the message box, right? We are also most of the time going to say open query to run some query. So using open query, we are able to run the query. If it is a selection query, it is going to show us the results as a datasheet. And I am able to choose the query name. So these are my saved queries. Let's say I would like to run the list students query when I click on this button. And if I save it and close it, going back into the form view, if I click on this button, it is going to run the query and display the results of it. If it was a deletion or insertion query or an update query, they are not showing any results, right? So it is going to just run that query. If that query is already open, if I click on the run query again, it is going to show it, or it is going to go into that tab. So if it is open as a tab, it just navigates to that tab. It is not running the query again. We are going to see it in a minute with the insertion and update queries. But most of the time, when we are displaying things, we would like to be inside the forms. So think about it. The user has some application, he is using it. When the button is clicked, if you show it inside the datasheet view, maybe the user will try to change some of the data, and if you go back into the user table, this is going to change the existing data, and maybe the user should not be able to change the things directly. So for that, if you are displaying multiple things as a list, I'm going back into the layout view under the design tab. To do that, we have the list box here. It is like this 8 element here. if I click on a list box and click on some empty place, it brings us the list box wizard, and we are going to use the wizard for this task because it is very useful. Otherwise we need to like set the data, set the format of the data individually. Using the wizard, we are able to type a list of values to display. But most of the time we would like to get the results from some table or some query. So the first option is selected. I'm going to click on next. And we have these tables, these queries in our database. We can display the results of any of these. So I'm going to show the results of the list students query, which is included in here. I'm going to choose that query, click on next button. And that's a projection query, so it projects some data, and these are the attributes that are projected. Which of them I'm interested in? Most of the time, if we are going to choose something, we should also include the primary key. I'm going to include all of them. You can like individually select them and like put them on the right side to show them. So if you do not include the primary key, we cannot select something from that list, or we are going to do the similar thing with the combo boxes, a similar item. If you would like to keep it simple, always include the primary key as well with the data that you would like to show. So I'm going to click on next. You are able to sort it according to some of the attributes in ascending or descending order. Let's say I would like to list the users, okay, but let's sort them according to the username, ascending or descending order, etc. I'm going to click on next again, and this is giving me an example output of the table. For some queries, if you are depending on parameters, then it is not going to show the data. For this query, we are not dependent on parameters, therefore it can just directly show the data. I'm going to click on next. Now, with lists, you can also choose items. So for this list, we are not going to use that option. We are not going to choose one of the students and do something with that. But if we would like to do so, if we would like to show a list of items, and if we want user to choose something, when that row is selected, it is going to return us one attribute. It can just return one attribute. And this is asking which attribute should be returned. So this is why I'm saying you should always include the primary key if you would like to select something, because we are interested in the primary keys since they are the unique ones. If I know the username, since it is not unique in this database, I cannot find a unique user. But given the student ID, which references the primary key ID of the user table, I can find the unique user or the unique student. So I'm going to choose the primary key, which is the student ID. And it is also bringing me a label, just like the text box. What should be written in that label? This is not really important. We can change it later on. I'm going to click on finish. Since my query did not depend on parameters, it shows directly the result of my query. Remember, with the run button, we are able to run that query, show it in a datasheet view. But using a list box, I am also able to show the results of that query. So if I save this and close it, whenever I click on this test form, I'm in the form view, it is displaying me the results of that query. Any problems, questions so far? Now let's do some insertion into our database. So we also included some queries to insert new users. If we look into the insert user query, it is basically inserting into the user table these following values in order. If you look at the user table, we only have 4 attributes. It is giving the 4 attributes in order as a parameter. And if I were to go into the design view and run this query, it is going to ask the parameters one by one. So let's say for ID, let's say it is 20. for username, maybe Ali, surname Veli, and the password 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
Could you try no for not case, for not case?
Sorry.
Username and surname.
Huh. So they are you asking whether I can give null values?
Yes.
Okay. So let me just finish this one. I'm about to append one row. If I check the user table, it will be there when I click on F5 key on my keyboard. If I let's say check the user table, the username is required and the surname is also required in this table. So if I give a null value to it, let me do it. So let's say for ID 21, let's say I'm giving nothing for username and maybe something for password. It is saying I'm about to append, but when it tries to append it, when it tries to enter it, it is a validation rule error. So the username should not be null in this case. But if it was allowing null values, if it was not required, then I will be able to enter null values there as well. Are there any questions? Is it okay?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So if it was not required, I will be able to like give null values. And remember, if I would like to give these parameters in a different order, I can also like specify the ordering with the attribute names in the query. So this time I would like to have a form, and in that form I would like to have some text boxes for each of these values that are given by the user, and I would like to run this query through the form view. Now let's try to do that. I'm not going to save the query since we changed something. So going to create and then blank form, this is going to be a new form. I'm going to first save it. Let's call this user insert form, for example. Going into the layout view, I need 4 different text boxes. So I'm going to include those text boxes first. And to give some information to the user, it is better to write what should user write in these text boxes. So I need the ID, the name, the surname, and the password. Remember, I'm not going to get the values of the labels, these are labels, but I need to get the values of the text boxes, so I need to give meaningful names to them. Right-clicking on the text box, going into the properties view, I have the name of this text box. So for this one, let's call it ID. Again, it might not allow some names in these parts as well, so be careful about it. Let's call this name. So for name, it is allowing, I guess, in here. So it can be like short names. These are just to refer them in the code part. So now I have the names. Then going into the query insert user, instead of saying that these are some parameters, I can following this format. So maybe I should write it in this part first. So we use the exclamation marks similar to dots in like other functional languages. So remember, to access an item in some object, we were using dots in some like different programming languages. In access queries, to say that okay, under this object, inside this object, we are using the exclamation marks. So starting with forms, we are saying okay, under the forms tab we have multiple forms, and then the form name, whatever you named your form as. Therefore it should be saved. If you do not save, you cannot reach the value of it from the queries. And then the item name. the item name is the name of the text box, for example, in our case. So in our case, we will start by saying forms. The name of the form, we named it as user insert. And then the name of the item. For example, for the ID, the text box name is ID. So writing this value, I can get the input from the user. So inside my query, instead of getting the ID as a parameter, I'm going to write that, okay, this ID is going to come from, among all the forms, there is a form called user insert, and inside that form there is an element called ID. Return me the value of it. And similarly for username as well, this time the name of the element is name. And then for surname, it is called surname. And these are, I think, case sensitive, so be careful about how you type them. And if you include empty spaces, there will be problem when you are trying to use it in the query. So don't include any empty spaces in the names of the items. So I gave the values of the parameters, or let's say the values of the items as parameters to my query. Now I'm going to save this query, insert user query, and I will close it. In this form, going back into the layout view under the design tab, I would like to also include a button, because to run a query I need the button. I'm going to include the button in some part, and I'm going to cancel the wizard. Let's give some name to the button. Let's call it insert user. And by right clicking on the button, going into the build events, I'm going to use the macro builder. And this is my macro page. Now I would like to run the query. Remember, to do that we had the open query. And the query name is going to be the insert user, to insert the user. Whatever it is written in that query, it is going to run it. If it is a projection, if we are selecting and showing some data, it is going to show it. But this is an insertion query, so it is going to just run the query. I'm going to save it and close it, and I will go into the form view to test it. So for now, there is nothing written inside these text boxes. If I click on the insert user button, it says that, okay, you are about to run some query that will append some data in your tables. I'm clicking on yes. It is trying to append one row. If I click on yes, it will be a problem because we are not giving any values, right? All of these text boxes are empty. So I'm going to close that. If you have some error, it will be displayed as like this. So one of our macros that tried to execute, and there was some error. It was more about the parameters, but it says that basically we did not succeed. So we need to give some result, or we need to put some input to these text boxes. For example, let's say for the ID 30, maybe Ayşe, Mayşe, and some password. I'm clicking on the insert user. I'm running some insertion query. It will append one row. If I click on yes, going back into the user table, if I refresh it, if it was open, or if I'm opening it as new, I will see that this new row is added. So any problems, questions? I'm going to close that. Just one important thing. So if the insert user query is open in some view, so insert user query is the query that we try to run when we click on this button. Let me write some other, let's say, inputs. The name doesn't need to change, but if the query that I would like to run is already open as a tab, when I click on the run query button, it will display the datasheet view of that query. So this is important. Sometimes people are like complaining that their queries does not work when they click on the button. this could be the reason. So if that query is open as a tab, it doesn't run it, it just opens it in the datasheet view. So when you are dealing or testing your forms, the queries should be like closed, otherwise you might have some problems. So now I close the tab. If I try to run it, it will run, and if I check the user table, it is going to display the new row as well. So the problem with getting the ID from the user is that the user might not know the available IDs. So right now, let's say if I try to add some BBs with the same ID, when I try to add it, it will give me a key violation. So the ID 34 already exists. Therefore, I'm not able to like put it again. To simplify the usage of it, most of the time the available IDs are generated automatically. And to do that, we have this next ID query. So remember, running this query, we are able to get the next available ID. If I run it now, it is showing me 35. So it was just basically looking at the maximum of the IDs, adding one to it and displaying it, assuming that the IDs will be like in increasing order. Using this query, I can directly put the ID of the new user. So if I go into the layout view, I would like to delete this text box for the ID, but now I need some way of getting the ID, right? So if I look at into the insert user query, in here I was giving some input from one of my elements. This time I would like to run some query, get the result of it, and put that result in this place. And to do that, we are going to use the dlookup function as well as the set temporary variable elements in macros. So let's go into our user insert form. In the layout view, I'm going to right click on the button and go into the build event part. So before I run the insert user query, I would like to set a temporary variable. So the thing we use in here is called set tempvar. And by the way, if you are using the Turkish version, the names would change. They are like translated. It is called geçici değişken belirle, etc. So one other item that we are using is set tempvar. And using this, we have a temporary variables table. We can put any item there. So let's say for the item name, it is going to store the next ID. I'm going to call it next ID. It will get some result from the expression and put that value into a table with the name next ID. So you can think it as a table of variables. I have a variable called next ID there. And for the value, I can just write some number here. I can write 5, for example. It is going to put the value 5 into that temporary variable. But most of the time, we would like to put some result of a query. And to do that, we have a function called dlookup. So this function runs a query, and for the first result it returns, it gets the value. So the naming convention, maybe I should first write it in a bigger form. So for the dlookup function, the first is attribute name. We have a semicolon in between. Be careful about it. So a semicolon, and then the query name. If the query name is not matching, if the attribute name is not matching, this will give you an error. Also be careful about it. For example, in this case, we are going to use this dlookup function. I'm going to, so right now I cannot save it because I have some error in this set temp var part. So I'm going to set the expression to 5 for now to be able to save it and close it. I'm going to check my query name. So to get the next available ID, the query name is find next ID. So the query name is going to be find next ID. It is going to run this query, and there could be multiple entries when we run a query. For this one, we know that there is only one thing, and the attribute name is called next ID. If you look into the SQL view of this query, we are giving a name to the result of this operation. So without the name, when we run it, we don't know the column name, so it is automatically generated according to the data type, etc. But to be able to get it, we are saying that, okay, this result is going to be called as next ID. So the column's name is next ID, the attribute name next ID. So running this function, it will run this query. For the first result, it will get the value of this attribute. So I'm going to copy it from here. I will close these open queries, right click on the button in user insert form, go into the build event part, and for the set temp var, okay, run this function, get the results in a temporary variable called next ID. This should be done first, so I want to run it first. I would like to find the next ID first, then I would like to insert the user. So I'm going to carry this set temp var block at top. You can also use this green arrows to move one of the elements up and down. So I'm first setting a temporary variable. It is stored in some place, and then I'm running my query. Let's save this macro and close it. Going back to my insert user query. Remember, I need the next available ID. Before running this query, I make sure that it is stored in temporary variables, and inside the temporary variables we gave a name to it. I forgot, I should check the name. So in here, our temporary variable name is called next ID. So we are basically saying that, okay, when we run this query, we can guarantee that there would be some value in our temporary variables table that is called next ID. So this is the variable that we store in there. Use the value of it. So if I save this query, now if I try to run it, it tries to append one row, etc., but it fails since the temporary variables is empty. But in our user form, when we click on this button, we first set the temporary variable as the result of this dlookup function, and then run the insert user query. So there should be no problem. So I'm going to close all these queries, and then I will go into the form view. Now when I try to enter a new user, it says I'm about to append a row, and it appends it. I'm going to click on this button again, and let's check our user table. Now we would see that the same user, okay, I did not change the name and surname, etc. But for each of these new users, a new ID is generated. So basically, using the dlookup function, we can run the function, and for the first result get the value of some attribute, and we can store it in the temporary variables. So to do that, in the macros we use the set temp var option. To refer it in the query, we are always saying temp vars exclamation mark and then the name of the variable. So we give the temporary variable names. So any questions, problems? So let's give a 10 minutes break and then we will continue.
Hocam
Evet.
ikinci derse giremeyeceğim galiba da YouTube kaydı olacak mı?
Ha, olacak evet. Yani sorun değil o.
Teşekkürler.
Önemli değil. Okay, shall we continue? So to recap what we did, let me check something first. Okay, to recap just what we did, we used the dlookup function, and what dlookup function does is, for the second parameter we give the query name. For this query, it runs the query. There could be multiple entries that are returned from this query, and for the first row, it always works for first row, returns the value of this attribute. So basically we set a temporary variable, and the value of that variable is the result of this function, and we use the setTempVar block in the macro. So using the setTempVar macro, we can give a variable name, and we can set the variable's value to something. And in the form, if I go into the layout view, going into the macro of this button, the first thing we do is to set the temporary variable, and then we are using this temporary variable inside the query that we open or that we run in this block. So if I try to run the query first, there will be a problem because the temporary variable should be set first. So I set the temporary variable and then run the query which uses that temporary variable. If I look into the insert user query, I see that I am using the temporary variable that is called next ID. And these temporary variables are global, meaning that I can set the temporary variable inside one form, and in some other form, after setting it, I can directly refer to it as tempvars next ID. So if I set this value, I can use it in any part. So for now, we are able to insert new users, but I would like to also be able to specify the type of the user. So I have students, teachers, and staff members. So remember, in those tables, so we had the parent user, and for example, the student was a child of user. We are keeping a foreign key that refers to the primary key of the user table inside student table. So for this attribute name, we can have different attribute names, right? If I look into the relationships view, the user is the parent. The primary key is called ID there. I have the staff, student, and teacher tables. They all have their different attribute names, but they all refer to this ID. So if I would like to assign a user as a student, I just include their ID in the specific table. And if I have some additional attributes, for example, for students, we are also keeping the scholarship amount, then I also include this scholarship amount. So if I also look into the student table, remember the scholarship amount was not required, so we can have null values. So I'm going to just use the same setup, and I would like to be able to specify whether this user is a student, a teacher, or a staff member. I can use text boxes for it, but if I use the text box, then the user could type just anything there. And I would like to be able to find out in the macro, I would like to be able to find out whether it is student, teacher, or staff member. If we allow user to type anything there, there would be a problem. There could be some typos, etc. We may not be able to find the type. For such things, we have the combo box. So using a combo box, I can give a list of items for the user to be able to choose among. So I'm going to put the combo box in this part. And for combo boxes, we also use the wizard. It is kind of similar to the list box. With list boxes, we list a bunch of items together. With combo boxes, we have a list of items, but one item is visible at a time. I can again get the results out of a table or a query. But for now, I would like to type the things that are included in the combo box. So I'm going to choose the second option. Click on next. Now this is giving me a way to like fill up the content of it. I can define any number of columns. In this case, I will say 2. So one of them is going to act like the primary key. So when I'm checking things, I will use these number values. And the second column, I'm going to use it to give information to the user. So for this, let's say student, teacher, and staff. So these are going to be my user types. And the user will be able to choose one of them. And whenever the user chooses, I will check it using these number values. So I'm going to click on next as well. So this is the return value. Whenever user selects some data from this combo box, I would like to return the column 1. So if I check the column 1, it is the numbers. So it is going to return me the number. Then I can check the number. So I'm going to click on next. And there would be a label, let's say for this type, or let's say user type. And I'm going to finish. So if I go into the form view, now I have my combo box, and if I click on this this list item or this small button, it is going to list the items that I just have written. So I can choose teachers, students, or staff, and whenever I choose something, the value is replaced with the value of column 1. So I get the number. So I will check it using the number. Now going back into the layout view, I need to give a meaningful name to my combo box as well. So it is for now called combo 35. If this property sheet is not open, I can click on the property sheet at this top part, or I can right click on my elements and open the properties. So let's call it type. And in my button, I'm going to go into the build event part. In my button, I would like to this time check the value of some item, and according to the comparison, I will do different things. So for that, we have if blocks. So if I add a new action here, I have the if action. We have a condition. So for if it is similar to like other programming languages, I can check whether some condition is true or not. If that is true, then I have this in part. Under this if, I can add a bunch of actions to do if this condition is true. And I can also include an else part for this if by clicking on this add else. So this if has a condition. If it's true, it is going to do these actions. On the else part, it is going to do these actions. So in here, the indentation part could be like somewhat confusing. Be careful about it. So if you click on that element, it is going to like display a gray area around the block that it does things. So if I, for example, in this if condition, let's say if it is true, if I would like to show a message box, etc., I have the message box macro. So if this is true, it is going to use this message box, etc. So my condition is going to be, so remember we named the combo box as type. So I can write type here. And to make comparison, we just use 1 equals sign. I can say, okay, if type is equal to 1. So it is trying to auto-complete it with the wrong thing. Okay. If the, okay, let me give some empty space there then. So if it is type is 1, let's display a message box saying student, for example. For this if block, I already added the else part. if this is not true, if type is not 1, then I can add some other if block as well. Or I could have, instead of using the else block, I'm going to remove it. So for any of these items, you can choose it, and on the top right part, you can delete them. So choosing the if block again, I can also add else if. So if I add else if, I can put some other condition. I can say, okay, if type is not 1, let's check whether it is 2 or not. If it is 2, let's display a message box saying, I guess it was teacher. And for this else if block, I'm able to add one more else part. If it is not 1, if it is not 2, it is going to be 3, because we have no other options. We know that the user cannot choose something else because the options are limited with the combo box. In this part, I'm going to use the message box saying stuff. So if I save it and close it, now I'm going into the form view. So let's say let's close that form and open it again. So nothing is written here now. Let's put some name here, maybe test, some password, and we need to choose the user type. So let's choose student first, insert user. It is going to insert the user, and it is showing me this student window. But this person is not assigned as a student yet. We just saw the student message. We did it to just see that it works. So if I choose 3, for example, it is going to say stuff because the third option is selected. Now we would like to also add it as a staff member or a student. So to do that, remember, the user is added into the user table. But if it is going to be a student, I should add the ID of this user into the student table as well. So to do that, we have other queries. So for inserting a new staff member, we just insert into the staff table. We need the ID, the primary key of the user. Remember, we earlier in the insert user part, we know that we set this temporary variable containing the ID of the user that we insert as a new user. So if I'm adding a new user, the ID of this user is included in this temporary variable, and I can use this temporary variable in other queries as well. So for inserting a new staff member, I need to insert the same ID into this table. So similar, for adding a new student, I need to insert this ID into the student table. And for the scholarship, I can include some other text box to type the scholarship amount. But for simplicity, let's say when a new student comes, there is like some constant scholarship amount. So I'm going to just write directly 100. I could have add a new text box to like input the scholarship amount as well. So closing these ones, I also need one for the insert teacher. So instead of asking the ID, use the ID that is included in this temporary variable. So I'm going to close those queries. Remember, if you are running a query and if it is open as a tab here, there will be a problem. So to run that query should not be open as a tab. In going into the layout view and going into the macros of this button, the first thing we do is to set the temporary variable. We know that next available ID is going to be included in this part. And then we insert that user, and then based on the user type, we can still have the message boxes, but I'm going to add a new action. If it is type 1, if it's a student, I would like to open the query that inserts it as a student. So I should run the insert student query. I'm going to carry it on top of the message box because like I need to run it first if it succeeds, and then we will see the message box. Maybe we can say student is added successfully, etc. Let's close this beeping. If it is this part, if it's type 2, it is a teacher, then I need to open the query. The name is going to be insert teacher. Again, I'm going to do it as the first thing in this if block. So be careful, you can like carry things out of the if boxes as well. So it should be inside this if block. So to add a new action at bottom, I have this part. If it is going to be a part of this if block, so if this condition is true, these are done. I can check it by like hiding and unhiding the else if block, or if you choose the else if block, it will display a gray rectangle around of the actions that it performs. So for this else part as well, I'm going to add the open query action, and this time it is going to be for inserting the stuff, and I will carry it at top. So for message boxes, you can write like this user is added successfully, etc. You can also include some parameters. So I'm going to save and close it for now. Remember, we had the name of the user, right? And it's in an item called name. So if I go into the macro of this button, in the success message, we are saying, okay, student is added, etc. But if I would like to use some parameters, remember we were using this equals sign, and then I can write name. It is going to get the name from the text box, but like there is also some other thing called name, I guess. So be careful about it. We would like to use the text box, not the form property. So some of the names are reserved again, but like be careful about it. Try to keep them like simpler or and unique. To concatenate string, we were using the ampersand sign. I will start the string with quotation, give some empty space, and then is added as a student. Maybe you can say it like that to give more information. And for other types of users, you can do the similar thing, show the name as a teacher, and for the stuff as well. We are using the same parameter. And I'm going to save this macro, close it. And now let's go into the form view to use it. Let's keep the values same, but add it as a teacher, insert user. It says, okay, we are about to append. This is the first query. It's added as a new user. Now, since this is a teacher, it is going to run some other query that inserts into our tables, and it adds it successfully. It says user insert is added as a teacher, because I guess we get the wrong thing. So user insert, the name, we refer to the wrong thing, I guess, or maybe using the same name was a problem. It could be. So going into the build event of this, so for this name, since there were like two variables with the same name, one is the form property and other is the text box. I choose the text box, but then I guess it uses the one that is closest, which was in this case the name of the button, I guess. In here it will be better to then like give a better name to this text box. Let's say uname for this one, username. So I'm going to save it. I need to correct it inside the insert user query as well, because we are referring to that. In this part it did not give an error because we are specifying where it comes from. But when I try to refer it directly inside a macro, remember this is some element in here and it may refer to more than one thing. So I now rename it as uname so that we don't have any problem. And I need to like fix it for other things as well. Now saving and closing it, going into the form view, let's add it as a student. the first query as the user, the second one as a student, and now I see the name correctly. This was like the thing that we fixed was just to show the name correctly. And now if I look at into the user table, the last one I added was this with ID 38. And if I check the student table, sorry, I need to refresh the user table. It was open. I hit the F5 key. The last ID is 40. This was the last thing I added. And this one was a student. So if I check the student table, I will see the ID 40 here as well. And if I run the list students query, now I will see this new user as a student as well. So for all other queries, etc., we consider the user ID 40 as a student. Any problems, questions? Now let's also try to enroll some students into some course. So to do that, I'm going to create a new form. Let's first save that form. Let's call it maybe enroll. And inside this part, so usually the student will log in and choose some courses, but let's say for this part we would like to choose the student and then choose the course and would like to enroll that student into that course. So to do that, I'm going to use two combo boxes because I would like to use some existing data. If I'm interested in the existing data, it is better to use combo boxes or list boxes. So this time I'm going to use a combo box. I will get the results out of a table or query. And to know the students with their names, we have the list students query. So I'm going to use the results of a query, and that is going to be the list students query. I'm going to choose it. I'm going to include all of the attributes, and I can order them according to something. Let's order them according to the student's ID. Clicking on the next. This is some example view. Next, and whenever I choose something, what should be returned? Now this is important because I'm going to use the primary key of the students. So I need the ID of the students. To enroll some students into some course, I need both the student ID and the course ID. And then I will add that into the enroll table. So whenever I choose something, I need the student ID. And there will be a label next to it. Let's call it the student. If I finish it, going into the form view, I can test it. When I click on this combo box, it will list the students. And whenever I choose something there, it will update the value as the primary key of the student. Now I need a similar thing for courses. And for courses, if we look at into the course table, the course code is the primary key, and the things that you might show for a course is included in the same table. For the student table, we just had the student IDs. We need to make a join with the user table. Therefore, we use the query. But for the courses, if I go into the layout view, clicking on this combo box item, I would like to get the values out of a table this time. So clicking on the next, I am going to choose my course table here, clicking on next. What I would like to show, I need the course code. It is the primary key plus the code name, but I know I don't need the description, let's say. Clicking on the next. Do I want to order them according to something, etc.? We can skip this if we do not want to order them. And this is some example view. Since this is a table, you have the option to hide the primary keys. But I would like to include the course code as well to show them. So in the view part, I uncheck the hide key column. Clicking on next, again the important part, whenever I choose something, which value, which attribute should be returned, it is going to be the primary key, which is the course code. Clicking on next, there will be a label next to it, what should be written in there. Let's say course for this one. Clicking on finish and going into the form view. Now we can list the courses. Whenever I choose some course, the return value is replaced as the course code. Now we need some query to enroll a student into some course using these elements. But for now we do not have such query. Let me first go into the layout view here. We need some meaningful names for these items. Going into the properties of the first combo box. It is called combo 0 now. Let's call it SCID for student ID. Or even simpler, let's call it SID. For the second one, I'm going to call it CID for course ID. And I need a new query. It was not implemented in here. I'm going to create and then query design. I'm going to close this dialog, go into the SQL view. We would like to add something, right? And to do that, the format was to insert into some table, etc. I'm going to copy it from here for simplicity. So this time we would like to insert into the enroll table. If I check the enrolled, the table is called enrolled. So the information about which student is enrolled into which course is inside the enrolled table. I need to give the course code, the student ID, and possibly the grades, but the grade can be null as well at the start. So let's close this table. We did not change anything. The first thing should be the course code. And it is going to come from this text box. So it is included. So among all the forms, exclamation mark, there is a form called enroll. And inside that form, there is an element, a combo box called CID. We gave the name CID to it. Get the course code from there. And for the student ID, it is included in the element called SID. And for the grades, let's keep it as null. Let me check whether it works as null or not. We will see that. So I'm going to save this query because to be able to run it with the button, we need the name of this query. Let's call it enroll into class. And I'm going to close this query. In this enroll form, let's go into the layout view. Under this design tab, we have our elements. I need a button. And canceling the button wizard, I will rename this button as enroll. And I will go into the build event, macro builder. I just want to open some query. And the query is the one that I just written, enroll into class. It is going to run this query with the values included in this part. So if I go into the form view, now I need to check the enroll table first. So for example, for student number, let's say 14. 14 is taking these classes. Let's enroll 14 into some other class as well. So for the students, let's choose 14. And the class, let's say Math 101. Let's click on enroll button. It is going to append something and it succeeds. We know that since we did not get any errors, if I check the enroll table, if I hit F5 key, then I see that the number 14 is also enrolled to Math 101. Now if I try to enroll 14 again to Math 101, then it will give me an error, right? Because in the enroll table, the primary key is the combination of the student ID and the course ID, but I cannot have duplicates. So the same student could not be enrolled for the same class twice, because two of these things contribute to our primary key for that enrolled table. So to solve this issue, instead of showing all the courses in this course part, we can limit the available courses. So we already have a query that lists the courses of some given student. So let me open it in design view first. This was done using QBE. It makes the join operations. and it has the criteria for some student ID to be equal to this parameter. And what that parameter is something we decide now. If I run this query, for example, with student number 14, I will see the courses of the student number 14 with their grades. So these are coming from the enrolled table. So we can get the courses that this student could still enroll into. So we need to write such query now. And maybe it would be easier to do it in the SQL view. So out of this part, so I'm not going to like change it. It is done automatically. It uses the inner joins, etc. But if I use this as a subquery, I know that the course codes, the course names, etc. will come out of it. So let's assume that the student ID is given. So whenever I run this query, it runs as I want. It gives me the course codes, etc. But I would like to modify it somehow. So maybe I should like copy it into some other query. So I don't want to change this query. Let's keep it as it is. I am going to create a new query. Go into SQL view, paste that code. I'm going to save this query. So this is list, let's say courses available for SID, let's say. So, okay, right now we did not finish. There is syntax error. Oh, it did not allow me to save it, sorry. So let's save it for now. Then I'm putting the parentheses to indicate that this is going to be my subquery. So I know that I can select from the course table, but I would like to put some condition. So inside the course table, we have the course underscore code. So course underscore codes should not be in this subquery. So it's kind of hard to make the indentation right in this view, but let's do it like this. So I'm selecting something. Let's also make it the related things. So I would like the course code and course name, let's say. So course code and course name. These are coming from the course table. And I want this course code to be not included in this set. And in that set, we have multiple things. Let's just get the course codes instead of projecting everything. Start course code. Okay, I need to get rid of that star. I forgot that. Okay. So for now, for a given SID, this should display the available courses. Let's try to run this query. It asks for the student ID. Let's write 14 again. And it is showing the available course with their name. So this query gets the student ID, first finds the enrolled courses of that student, and we look at the courses that are not in that list. So this student can enroll to this course only. The other courses this student is already enrolled to. Any problems, questions so far? So now I'm going to use it in this combo box. Going back into the layout view of my enroll form, I will delete this one because when we are creating combo boxes and list boxes, we need to use the wizard. It makes our lives very easier. Under this design tab, I'm going to add it as a new combo box. I would like to get the results from a query, and that query is going to be the one that I just implemented, list courses available for SID. So which courses this student could enroll into. And I would like to use the two thing, both of the attributes. We don't need any ordering. So this is some example view. Now, since I'm using a parameter inside the query, so the parameter is the SID of the student. Since I'm using the parameter, it cannot show me an example view of the data right now, but the format, the columns are right. So I'm going to click on next. And again, whenever I choose something in here, which value, which attribute should be returned, it is going to be the course code. And the label, for the label, let's again write course next to it. And for the name of this combo box, remember we renamed the first one as SID. And for the courses, we created one, we called it CID. We deleted that one. For the new one, again, I'm going to call it CID because we are referring to that CID inside other queries. For example, in the enroll into class query, if I go into design view, I refer to it as CID. So if I change the name correctly, there will be no problem in using these older queries. So now if I go into the form view, let's try to show the courses. It asks for the ID of the student. I can write 14. Now it shows for 14. Whenever I change the student's ID, I would like to show the courses of this student. So to do that, I'm going back into the layout view. So for the list courses that are available for this student, so in this query, instead of saying the student's ID is a parameter, I would like to get it from the form. And if I check the enrolled into class, I know that this contains the ID of the selected students. So within all the forms, we have a form called enroll, and inside that we have a text box called SID. Get the ID of the student from there. So I'm going to save it and close it. I will close this query as well. In the enroll part, if I go into the form view now, so I change the student ID. Now it is still displaying it for the 14 because it did not update my query that is attached to this combo box. If I choose the number, for example, if I choose some student, hit the F5 key on my keyboard, then it lists for student number 8. There is no any additional class student number 8 can take. So let's check for maybe for student number 40. If I hit the F5 key on my keyboard, it will refresh the query that is attached to this combo box. And when I check this combo box, it will list it correctly. Let's enroll 40 into English 101, for example. I'm appending the necessary things. If I check it again now, it is not updated, but if I hit the F5 key on my keyboard, I will see that the list is now updated. Now I would like to automate this process. Whenever I change the student, I would like to update the query that is attached to this combo box. To do that, we have another macro action. So I will go into the layout view, and while this combo box is selected in the property sheets, I have events. So in the property sheets, we have an option for all. It lists all the options. Some of them are related to the format, the style, some of them are related to the data, etc. And some of them are events. Events mean that whenever one of these happens, we can run some macro. And for the student part, I'm going to say, okay, whenever this value changes on change, so for this on change event, if you click on this button with 3 dots in it, I can choose the macro builder again. And this is going to be the on change event of my first combo box. And the thing that I would like to do is called requery. So one other action that we are going to use is requery. Given the name of the element, it updates the query that is attached to that item. So it says control name. In this case, it is going to be the control called CID. CID is our combo box. Whenever we change the value of this combo box for the students, update the query of the second combo box, which contains the the courses. So I'm going to save it, close it. Going into the form view, whenever I change a student for the first one, no available courses, but this has some value. We can again type some value in there. It is still allowed, but if I look at into the combo box values, there is nothing listed. But let's change it. So for each of the students, it lists the new values. For example, again, for the new student value, let's add Math 101 as well. I can click on enroll after the operation. Math 101 is still there. I need to like change it back to some other student and back to value again to update it. Let's also use the requery option when we click on the enroll button. So going into the layout view, whenever I click on this enroll button, so let's go into the build event, I run my query to enroll into some class, and also let's requery the CID. So the course should be updated as well. So I'm going to save it. One additional thing, maybe we would like to clear the data in this course part as well. So let's go into the on change event of the student. So for the student combo box, I choose it, click on these three dots again. I was doing the requery option, and we have not that one. So we have set property. So this one we don't need to use it that much, but let's also include it in this list. Set property. It is used to set some property of one of the items. So the control name is again like similar to the thing. So whenever we change the student, we would like to update the list of CID, but there might be nothing in the CID. So we would like to like refresh its written value as well. So for the value, it should be equal to nothing. So I'm setting the property. There are multiple properties in it. The value is what's written in the combo box, and I'm setting it to nothing whenever I change the student. So for example, in the form view, I change the student. Let's say I choose Math 101 for this student, but then I change my mind. Let's go into some other students. Now it deletes the value in that course combo box as well. And we should do the similar thing in the enroll button. So after the requery, let's set property of CID, and the thing that we set is the value of it, and it is going to be equal to nothing. So right now, if I go into the form view, let's choose some course for some student. For James, let's take English 101. After the operation, now the course list is refreshed, and I don't see the course in this combo box anymore. And just one more thing before we left is we can, using buttons, we can also navigate through different form pages. Going into the layout view, I will add a new button here, cancel the button wizard. Let's call it, go to user insert, right clicking on its name, going into build events, I will use the macro builder. The action we use is open form. So these are the things that we mostly use for macro builder. And we can like navigate into some existing form. Whenever I click on this button, I would like to go into the user insert form, for example. And it is a good idea to include some buttons to go back as well in like necessary places. going into the layout view of user insert form, I'm going to include some other button saying, let's say, go to enroll form. And it's not sufficiently large, I will enlarge it. Going into the macro page of this button, I would like to open form, and the thing that I would like to open is the enroll form. So let's save everything and close all, and I will open the user insert form, for example. I can insert some new users, etc. But if I click on the go to enroll form, then it will open the enroll form. And if the form is already open, I can navigate among them. If it is not open, it is going to open it as a new form. So for example, if I write something in the user insert form, go into enroll form, go back to insert form, since it was open, the value is there. But we can, like, if we close that, go into that, we will open it as a new form. And like basically in the project as well, we expect similar thing from you. So in your project you will have some forms, some scenarios will be defined, by the way, and it is like we will announce it soon, but for each of the projects we have 3 different scenarios. And in the implementation stage 2 and the final demo, we expect you to show these scenarios. So for implementation stage 1, you are going to create the database, create the tables, create the relations, and populate it with some data. So for example, what we mean by populate is like, I created the student table, the user table, let's enter some meaningful data, not much, like 10 rows of data in each table, etc. And for implementation stage 2, we expect you to choose one of these scenarios and implement it. For example, they are mostly starting with login as something, etc. So right now in the next lab we will see how to create a login operation, but they mostly start as like login as some user. For example, for some of them, let's look. So it says login as a user, list all connection requests. So this was like some social networking project. And if we are saying, for example, list something, you might use the list boxes. If we say like insert some data, create new offer, so offer is most probably a table, and in that table you can like create, insert new results, etc. So this one we are going to like announce it soon. It is going to be used for implementation stage 2 and the final demo. For the implementation stage 1, we are going to again create the assignment soon, but it is going to be a simpler task of creating the tables, creating the relationships, and populating your tables. And you should like during this lab and the next lab, you should be able to like imagine how the project's end result would be like. So basically you would, for example, have a menu. We will be able to like navigate among different forms, and in each form there would be like some functionality. For example, in this form we are enrolling students into some courses, etc. And there are like multiple different ways of doing the same thing, and it would be more desirable to like use the suitable elements. For example, instead of using combo boxes here, I can use a text box and want user to know all of the primary keys of the student table and the course table, etc. But then it is not that functional. So in the project we expect some sort of like a good user experience as well. So if you are choosing among a set of existing things, combo boxes, list boxes are preferable. If you are inserting some new data, if you need the name, for example, text boxes are better, etc. So do you have any questions, problems? So otherwise we are finished. Thank you for listening. Okay, see you later.